Having eschewed the purely factual approach, I was not willing to go to the other extreme and take the easy way out by writing fiction. My métier lay somewhere in between, what was then a gray void between fact and fiction. Farley had a genuine enough gift for prose that he was able to pull this off. He was really a larger-than-life figure. I like to say this when I talk about people, and I enjoy talking about people who have very big personalities. And Farley is no exception to this rule. My name is Myron Groover. I'm Archives and Rare Books librarian here at McMaster University, and I'm here today to talk to you about the archives of Farley Mowat. Farley Mowat was one of Canada's best known, best loved, most successful authors. He's very famous for a number of things, but in terms of his writings, he's famous for writing about Canada's North. He's also known as really a passionate advocate for environmentalism. And as I say, he's one of Canada's most successful authors. He wrote over 40 books. They've sold over 15 million copies. They've been translated in 52 languages all around the world. In recognition of these achievements, he received numerous awards throughout his life, from the Governor General's Award to the Order of Canada and beyond. He never actually finished his studies at the University of Toronto, but he received many, many honorary degrees, including one from McMaster. He was born into what already seemed like kind of a grand story in a certain way. So he's born in 1921 in Belleville, Ontario. His father Angus had served at the Battle of Vimy Ridge in the First World War. His great-great-uncle was none other than Sir Oliver Mowat himself, the third Premier of Ontario. So he's got quite an interesting pedigree. But it's really when the family moves to Saskatchewan in the 1930s that his burgeoning interest in nature and writing really take off. When he's only a teenager, he starts writing a column on birds for the Saskatoon Star Phoenix. The column was pulled because he wrote what were seen as uncomfortably vivid descriptions of birds' mating habits, which at the time was quite risque, and they were like, "Farley, you can't write about this. Your column's done, you'll never write for this paper again." So they told him his column was canceled. It didn't even slow him down. This highlights an early clash with authority, which is something that sort of typified the rest of Farley Mowat's life. He really didn't enjoy playing by the rules. And by the time he's 19 years old, he actually goes on his first collecting expedition. And the other person who goes with him on that expedition is Frank Banfield, who goes on to become one of Canada's preeminent scholars of mammals. In the late 1940s, he actually gets hired by the Canadian Wildlife Service, working again under Frank Banfield, doing all kinds of population studies of animals in the Canadian North. And so here we have a couple of artifacts from that expedition, including what has the dubious honor of being perhaps the single grossest item that I've ever had the chance to work with in my career, which is this notebook right here. Now this is a notebook which between its pages has pressed hundreds and hundreds of, at this point, mummified mosquitoes. The caption on the page says, "This collection of mosquitoes was made at Wolf Knoll on June 23rd by simply clapping the pages of this book closed about 30 times. They were so thick about our heads as to make a solid cloud." He had an eye for things like this that were visually dynamic, and that's one of the fun things about the work we get to do, is trying to figure out how to save things like this and preserve them so that they can be passed forward to future generations. And we also have here one of his field notebooks from that expedition. This has a diagram of a wolf, but the rest of this notebook has his observations on all sorts of animals in the Arctic. He wasn't ultimately successful in that role. In fact, he was ordered to be fired by no one other than the head of the Wildlife Service himself, owing to what his obituary describes as a lack of advance formal approval for some activities. But just like when his column was canceled, that didn't really slow him down. If anything, that increased his motivation to work as a writer. By the early 1950s, he's turning to writing as a more and more serious pursuit. He's known as a humorist writer, somebody with a great sense of humor. And one of the things that's a frequent target of that humor is bureaucracy, which he finds completely absurd. So the publisher McClelland and Stewart, which at the time was sort of one of the foremost, if not the foremost Canadian publisher, picked him up in the mid-1950s, and he became a very close personal friend of Jack McClelland himself. The two of them got into all sorts of misadventures together. We actually have Jack McClelland's archive here as well, and in that archive there are a number of photos of the two of them partying together on vacation. He's actually often accused of having something of a cavalier approach to the facts. He himself claimed to never let the facts get in the way of the truth. When he donated these archives to McMaster in 1974, he hedged his bets. He realized that the details in the notebooks contradicted the accounts that he had put in his published stories in a lot of instances. So obviously this is not the least controversial approach you can take to your career as an autobiographical author, but Farley had a big enough personality and a good enough sense of humor that he was able to pull this off. When he passed away in 2014, he was actually the subject of an obituary in the Canadian Field Naturalist, which is a scientific publication. And they summed up his work this way: his writings made an impact by focusing on basic truths as he saw them, and his delight in goring bureaucracy. By adding to a growing public focus on wildlife and conservation, they helped promote pressure for increased governmental protection at all levels, and influence young scientists to research careers on the problems faced by the creatures with which we share the Earth.